after you work for a certain number of travel companies, by the time I was up to 3, the 4 extras weren't much more work. Like I already had it dialed in. Yeah. I'm already structured. And then I was kind of known, like I would only go after like the big contracts. And I'd always get them, so like and they knew that. So I was like, don't call me unless it's over this number, like I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to hear, they'll call you up and be like, it's Happy Monday and we sent you a basket. Like, I don't want a basket. I don't want to hear Happy Monday. Stop waking me up. I'm working night shift. Like Happy Monday when I'm sleeping is not great. Like, just get me the big dollars.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of Investing RN. We got a special guest in the house tonight. We've done this format before, but only with Jen and the roundtable discussions. But we got a live guest in one studio. Josh is still by himself, as per usual. But yeah, here today with Josh and now Steve B. We'll call him Steve B.
Just you can use my whole name. It's okay. I'm not hiding or anything.
Not yet running from the law.
Yeah.
No witness protection or anything like that.
Yeah. So Steve B., a nurse I work with up here in Northern California, and he's got several different businesses he's running in addition to 16 different nursing jobs he's doing simultaneously. Yeah, we just had dinner and we were talking about all these different jobs he's doing and different ways to negotiate wages and float pools and all these different things. So a lot of little tips and tricks for any of the newer nurses, especially that are trying to find ways through basically to maximize your income in healthcare. So yeah, thanks for coming over, dude.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I wasn't anticipating doing a podcast, so it's my first time ever being on a podcast, so bear with me. If I need to speak up for something, let me know.
No, yeah, you're good. Yeah. I know. He was like, "Hey, you want to hang out?" I was like, "Yes." Do you want to record a podcast
at a price?
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
At this point, should I just do a little introduction for myself?
Yeah, you could just kind of tell us about, your background in nursing briefly, and then we'll get into some of the good stuff.
Yeah, so I had a kind of a atypical approach to nursing. I was actually originally on a medical track, going to go to medical school, had everything lined up and ready to go. Backstory, like I was telling Colin earlier, though, I grew up like a really poor, like welfare kid. My family literally had nothing. And so, we had to kind of, I was living off of government loans and stuff to go to school, and I was working the whole time. And I've been working since I was 16, never stopped. Turns out it's like about $10,000 to go to medical school, at least back in the day. It's probably more than that now, just by the time you like do application fees and MCAT and prep courses and all that stuff. And I didn't have it. And so I was like, well, maybe I won't do that. Maybe I'll go into dentistry or do something else. And I took a year off and was kind of trying to figure out what to do. And then I just accidentally kind of stumbled back into nursing. And because I did the medical track, I already had everything done. And so I like literally applied, and like 2 weeks later, or I thought about it, and about 2 weeks later, it was all the application deadlines. I got in like first try, which would probably make a lot of people mad because a lot of people try forever. I literally stumbled into it by accident and was the nurse like in nursing school like 4 months later. And kind of worked through it. And it was, I've always been really clear. I'm like I do not like nursing school or nursing school instructors or the curriculum. I've always like having gone through what I went through beforehand. Like I thought it was just a joke. I kind of slept through it. But I made it through, got out, and I started making money. At the time, I was like, man, this is crazy money. I'm like, I've never had this kind of money. And I started out $24 an hour. And I was like, I am so rich. I can't possibly spend all of this, and very quickly, I think my first year as a nurse, I started in Washington at 24. I think, if I remember correctly, I think my first year I managed to pull out like $60,000. And then I managed to make over six figures ever since then. But if you kind of do the math on, like I was saying, like that was a lot of hours and a lot of overtime. And I was just, I would do 16, Washington, you could only do 2 16s in a row, but I would do 16, 16, 12, 16, 16, 12, 16, 16, 12, and just crank away. Cause at the time I was like, I think this is how you get ahead. You just work, and so I didn't have anybody around me that ever had made any money, or nobody that was in any business or anything. So I didn't have anybody to tell me or teach me that, hey, that's not actually how you get ahead. There's a whole nother world out there it's not a secret, but it is kind of behind a closed door for a lot of people. And it took me about 3 years into nursing of just cranking away before I realized like, oh, there's another piece to this. Like this is unsustainable. Like there has to be something else. And that's what kind of got me in the pathway of starting to look at like business opportunities, investment things, and maximizing tax saving strategies and stuff like that. So it took me, I said about 3 years, but then I had to like build up the capital and build up all the knowledge and everything. So I mean, I've been a nurse now for 16 years. I started travel nursing at year 3, keeping a per diem at my original job back and forth for like, I think I did that for about 7 years. And then I did a stint for flight nursing for a very brief time. And then I kind of settled when I came out to California. I kind of got out here and saw the wage structures and the benefits and everything. And I started doing the math. I was like, man, I make more money being staff out here than I was a traveler by a long margin. And then I'm like reading the contracts and I'm looking over it. And I'm like, oh, I got to come out here and they make this like my official thing. So what I would do is I would fly back and forth. I would live in Washington, fly in, work my 10 days, make my 20 grand, fly back home. And then, just do that. It was great. Yeah. It worked out quite well for a while until I kind of got more anchored down here and bought a house and everything, but a very nice way of doing it. I have quite a few coworkers I still work with that still do the same thing. Like they just fly in, they work their shifts, they get out. It's getting a little harder. Overtime's getting tighter. Guys is getting a little crazier, but our wages get higher. So it's kind of one of those things. Yeah.
Well, and being out here in California myself, like I've worked all over LA, Northern California, and I've seen that same thing where people are coming in from Louisiana, people are coming in from, Mississippi, all these other places where the cost of living is so much lower, but the wages are also so much lower. And it's just crazy. I mean, they can come out here, work, like you said, 10 days straight, get your shifts in, and then go back, have 3 weeks off and then just like live on, these wages that you would never earn in your home state. So we're still, I mean, even at the hospital we're both at, like I still see some of that. You're still seeing it at Kaiser. One of the things we were talking about earlier was the overtime. And then, the thing we always talk about is the golden handcuffs, right? It's like you're making so much money and the more you work, the more you make. But then obviously, as I think we've all realized, that's not the long-term strategy for building true wealth. But one of the things you were saying, and something that I saw when I was starting off and trying to pick up all this extra time, was how each extra shift you picked up, it was like the value of that shift went down. So you were saying it was like a certain number, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't be quite. This is kind of ballpark now because it's a couple of years ago. I sat down and I did the math, and I was like, because I'm a numbers guy. I like math. It's always been my thing, and so I sat down and I think at the time it was around 216,000. Like once you hit 216,000 a year in salary, you started having really diminishing returns. And then I just did the math on like, okay, if I made $200,000 and I calculated my take home and I wanted to make that same take home again, working at the same job, you'd have to work 1.6x hours again. So if you had to work 1,000 hours to take home 170, say, you'd have to work 1,600 hours to take home another 170,000. And so, I started doing the math on like the diminishing returns, and it starts to be kind of crazy. Like you get to a point when like some of my paychecks, literally, I was taking home less than the tax share. So I've hit that bracket. It's not uncommon. There's I personally am aware of multiple, Kaiser RNs who make $500,000, $600,000 a year, with overtime, but they're losing half of that. So like it's about 50% of it goes out the door. And I kind of was like not interested in that. I kind of was like, you know what? This is not like I'm working so much harder to take home less. There has to be a different strategy. There has to be a better way. And so that's when I kind of really started looking at like, businesses and after right around COVID, I think it was 2018. And I think again in 2021 or 2022, they changed a lot of the rules and it made it a little bit easier to write off W-2 income. Still hard with the real estate stuff, but it's easier with other aspects. So it became a little bit easier to write some of that down. So your tax burden is legally less.
Yeah.
So your first venture outside of just your clock in, clock out, was it trying to save on taxes, or were you trying to start up a side business or side hustle?
My very first thing was I was still a pretty young nurse. Like I said, I was about year 3.5, and I was going to start traveling because I kind of realized like that was kind of where the money was. And I needed I'm looking around, I'm talking to my coworkers and other people in other fields and stuff. And I realized like they were writing off so much and I'm just getting hit on my taxes. Like I'm just getting crushed. And now it's laughable to my amount, but back then I was thinking, this is crazy. I got to figure out what these people are doing because they're getting positive returns and I'm always paying in. And I had 1 year where it was like, I think my third year I wound up paying in like, it was over 10 grand. And I wasn't making the money that I make now at that time. And so it was like a crazy amount of money. And so what I wound up doing was I bought a house in my hometown, and that was kind of like my anchor house. Like I used that as a way to have a base of operations for my traveling, so that I could say, hey, I have a home, I have a mortgage, I have utilities that I pay, I have everything. So when I'm taking that stipend, I'm not doing it illegally. It also was just kind of a way for me to write off that interest on the house. And so I was able to write off the interest and actually get back a positive tax return, so I was not paying in anymore. And that was really eye opening. Like that was like, oh, this just saved me a lot of money. This just had a $10,000 swing, actually more than that because I was paying in $10,000 in taxes because apparently I wasn't holding out enough. And now I'm getting back, 2,500. So I'm like, man, that's a $12,000 swing. That's, the mortgage on that house was only like $700 a month. I'm like, that's more than my mortgage. I'm basically getting a free house. And that's when like the light bulbs kind of start going off and I start realizing like, oh, this is a way smarter way to do this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and at $24 an hour, I don't know what you were making at the time, but just for example, at $24 an hour, saving $12,000 or making an extra $12,000 is the equivalent of about 12 weeks of work. So it's like,
oh yeah,
I mean, that's, full-time work, $24 an hour. So that's a huge shift.
Yeah. And we were, kind of gaming the system and watching the place I used to work for is if you short rested, if you only had less than 8 hours between a shift, you got time and a half your whole shift, the next shift. And so what we do is we come in and work a 4-hour princess shift and then 7.5 hours later, come back and work a 16, which would put you into a short rest for the next 16, which would put you in a short rest for the 12. So that first 4 would be normal pay, but the 16, the 16, and the 12 would all be time and a half. And then you would do another princess and repeat it. But in hindsight, probably not the safest thing and probably like not the healthiest way of doing life. Like it just was like, and so like, you do that for a little while and you just think it's crazy. And then after a minute, you're like, I don't know how long I can keep doing this, like I have to sleep at some point, And so like that's what kind of like really got me going on it. And then, once I actually started traveling and doing the travel contracts, that house became really important because not one, I was able to come back to it in between contracts. I kept a per diem so I could come back, if the contracts weren't good. And then it just opened up that door so I could always yo-yo back and forth. And I never had to worry about if I was, meeting my obligations under like the stipend rules, because I'll say this, most travel nurses, I would say the bulk of travel nurses are actually committing tax fraud. Yeah. And so I had my own travel nursing company for a minute and we didn't talk about that, but yeah,
one more business
I had. And that was really eye-opening for the rules. And they will, the companies themselves will tell you a lot of things that is incorrect because the tax burden doesn't fall on them. It falls on you to do it properly. And so most people are inappropriately using their stipends and technically would be a taxable event if somebody really looked at it. But, so like having a real house and a real thing that negates pretty much all of that. And so it really helps you out in that regard.
Were you renting the house out to anyone at the time?
No, it was mine. My mom lived there. So my mom had recently gone through divorce and needed a place. So it kind of was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So I basically was able to like buy my mom a house, but it was still mine. Yeah. And then, so that was like kind of my base of operations, but it was also great because she kind of just kept the place up and, made it nice and everything.
You were probably one of, like you said, one of the few legit travel nurses. Cause I mean, I know a lot of people that were just, using an address from wherever or just, cause it's technically the whole,
I would have done that.
Yeah.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
Because like the whole idea is that you have this home that you're paying for. And so because of that, you get the tax-free stipend. But yeah, if you don't actually have that expense, then I guess, yeah.
Yeah. And then like,
allegedly it's
and if anybody out there is a travel nurse, they want to like listening to it and they want to know like the reality is that you have to duplicate expenses, but not only do the expenses have to be duplicated, it has to be market rate. So if you were staying with a buddy for $200, here in, say Bay Area, and they're saying, hey, I'm renting a room for $200 and you throw him a check and he gives you back $200. they will say that's not market rate for Bay Area. This should be, $2,000. So that doesn't count. So like that's one thing people go wrong. They're like, oh, I give my mom $200 a month, and she says I live there. I'm like, that's not market rate. It doesn't count.
Yeah.
And then technically on the stipend they give you food and housing, but the food, they don't care about that. They assume you eat. You don't have to keep track of that. But the housing, every penny of money that you get for housing, you're supposed to have a receipt showing that you spent that much on housing. Every dollar.
Nobody's doing
No one does that. Like literally nobody. They go find like the cheapest, shack they can rent for a couple $100 a month and sleep in that, or sleep in their truck, or sleep in whatever. And then they just pocket that stipend. So there is no receipt. And technically, if you got popped, you're supposed to show them that receipt. So
when we had a travel nurse that was literally sleeping in her car. So I mean, yeah, like what are you going to say there as far as your like housing stipend? It's like your car payment,
maybe your car payment. If you're lucky, your car
gas,
insurance, you could maybe finagle into that. But they tell you, that's the thing where they get you, is that your recruiters will just straight up lie to you. And I don't know if it's on purpose. I don't know if they're just they don't know, they're uneducated on the area. Tax law is kind of tricky, but they'll just straight up tell you, oh yeah, just maximize your stipend. It doesn't matter. When I first started, they got in trouble for this a little bit, and there's some class actions. But when I was started, they would say, what do you want your wage to be, and what do you want your stipend to be? And so my first contract when I took in St. Louis, I set my wage to, I think, 15 an hour, and then everything I got paid in was stipend. So I made all of my money in stipend.
And that's usually how it's structured. Like every travel assignment I had, I was getting paid like $20 an hour, and the rest of it was stipend. So I mean, that's why you do so well with it usually.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it can bite you in the butt if you go to buy a house, because it looks like you don't make any. There's no income there, So like if you've been doing it for a while, and that's the only thing, then it gets a little tricky when you're trying to buy property, which I found out later. Yeah, so I went to buy when I went to buy my second property. It was really, I had to jump through a lot of hoops because I was traveling primarily at the time with a small per diem, and they basically I had to bring in a bunch of get creative with a lender and bring in a bunch of bank account statements and stuff, and showing like how much I actually brought in, and had like years worth of stuff. And that was the only way. I don't even know if it would pass muster today that I was able to even get that through, because, on paper it looked like I made nothing, like it was like, oh, you're making like 20,000 a year. You can't afford this place, Plus I still had the other house payment, and they're like, you have two house payments. There's no way. Like, we don't even know how you have the other place. How are you affording this place too? Yeah.
Well, and I think like it's interesting because you're, saying you've always been very transparent with your, wages, especially like as a traveler, when the staff nurses would ask you. And I always felt the same way, because I always felt like kind of like it's us against them. But it's interesting because I think a lot of nurses will, I don't know, for whatever reason, kind of hide how much they're making. I don't know if it's like some of them are making more and they don't want anybody to know, or some of them make less and they're embarrassed. But I just feel like within the nursing world, like we should all look out for each other. Cause I've always been the same way too. Like, especially with other travelers, I'd be like, hey, I asked for this. I negotiated this into I got a scrub allowance. And then when I renewed, I got another scrub allowance. And then I got like a relocation bonus, and I got a renewal bonus. And there's so many different ways you can negotiate more into your contract, but like people are not always forthcoming with that information. And I don't know why. I think it's just kind of goes back to some of the toxicity within the nursing culture, unfortunately. But I'm always trying to like help each other, and like help others out.
It's a little bit funny how that works out too, because being on the side of it, on the business side of it, when you are negotiating with a hospital, it's just a set rate. All of the stipend, the meal allowances, the scrub bonuses, all that stuff that people think that they're negotiating, they're not negotiating with the hospital. The hospital would say, like, I had a contract in Eastern Washington, and they just billed them $135 years ago, but I billed them $135 an hour for every hour my employee worked, period. Like, end of story. That was it. And then I paid the employee X amount for stipend or this or that, everything else. But like, the hospital didn't have anything to do with that. The hospital just says, we paid this much for a traveler, and this is your check. And so that's, we do that. And so there's like this myth, like they're going to go, it's almost like buying a car where like the nurse and the agent will kind of go back and forth, and they'll be like, oh, we got you more money. We did this, we did that. And it's like, no, they didn't. They just took a smaller cut. Like, that's basically all they're doing, is taking a smaller cut, because it's a set rate, and it, we negotiated way before, like before I even put the contract out there. I already
Yeah.
knew what the rate was going to be. And so like they play a lot of weaselly games and stuff like that in the back end. Which I don't even know how they get away with anymore, because now there's so much information out there, 10 years ago when I was doing this, like it should have been easier, but I still see the same themes and the same problems, like in the travel blogs and stuff, or the same misinformation that's out there. And I'm not, and it doesn't take much of a Google search to kind of figure it out or watch somebody, but I don't think a lot of people are as transparent about it. And so it kind of just limps along and without anybody doing anything about it.
But and that's my point. It's like, I think as we all talked, people realized like, oh, you're making that much, and we all had different recruiters, but it was like, yeah, you just have to ask for more, because again, like whatever the difference is, that's how much less that the travel company's making. But it's like, you're the one doing the work, so we're all just like, hey, look, like we got this much, go ask for that. And some people would and some people wouldn't. Or like changing travel companies, like I would always just be like, I would pit them against each other.
Mm-hmm.
I would just straight up tell them like, hey, look, I can get this much from this company. If you're not willing to give me that, then I'll go work for this other company. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's.
I think at one point I had 7 companies I was working for. Yeah.
So it's a lot of work though. Like every time you sign up for a travel company, you got to submit all your credentials. You got to go through all their application process. And that would be enough to hold some people up. But I would always tell people, I'd be like, look, like, let's say you get an extra like $5 an hour by doing all this paperwork. Like how quickly does that pay off the 3 hours or the 2 hours it takes you to submit the extra paperwork for this new company or whatever?
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause it's like, let's say it takes you 3 hours. Well, now for 13 weeks, you're making an extra $5 an hour, 36 hours a week. I mean, you could probably do that math quicker than I can, but but I mean, it's a lot of money. And your hourly rate for that 3 hours of work is probably like $1,000.
Yeah.
So it's totally worth it. But people don't look at things like that, I think. And I surely didn't always, but more so now as you become aware of things, you start to look at that.
I think some people are just lazy. Like
It's total. Yeah.
They'll miss out on $2,000 because they don't want to use a different company. That just doesn't make sense to me.
But I think it's just because they don't think of it in that way. Like they're lazy, but they don't know what their laziness is truly costing them.
Yeah. Because they'll put in, they'll go and just work their butts off and do a ton of extra hours.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you didn't have to do that. You could have just made a phone call, and it's just like, so yeah, it's like, just make the phone call, do a little bit of, time, and everyone, always thinks, well, that's so much work. But like, honestly, after you work for a certain number of travel companies, by the time I was up to 3, the 4 extras weren't much more work. Like I already had it dialed in. Yeah. I'm already structured. And then I was kind of known, like, I was like, I would only go after like the big contracts. And I'd always get them, so like and they knew that. So I was like, don't call me unless it's over this number, like, I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to hear, they'll call you up and be like, it's Happy Monday and we sent you a basket. Like, I don't want a basket. I don't want to hear Happy Monday. Stop waking me up. I'm working night shift. Like, Happy Monday when I'm sleeping is not great. Like, just get me the big dollars, and so, but I think it just depends on your mindset of like how you go after it. Cause I was there. I don't care where you send me, send me to Stockton. Cool. You send me downtown St. Louis. Cool. I'll be there, dodge bullets. I'll hop into work, like you have crazy stuff happening down there, but like, I'm just there for the paycheck, like the biggest possible one that I can get. So it makes sense to me to play companies off of each other, but they get mad and they throw a little fit, but like,
who cares?
We're not, I always tell people, your recruiter is not your friend.
Yeah.
Like,
they act like it, but they're not.
They are not your friend. They're trying to squeeze you, and make it look like they're not.
Yeah. My tip would be, like, whenever you apply for a job, just take all those things that they're asking for, your BLS cards, your ACLS cards, your Social Security, just take all those and put them in a file, like labeled, or, RN packet or whatever. And then every time you have to apply for a new job, it's all right there. Cause that's the hardest thing, is just tracking all that stuff down. But once, like you said, once you've done it 3 times, one time, you have it all there. It's the same application process for every company. And it's just like all the same resources, all the same, like, references and all that. It's just boom, copy and paste essentially.
Yeah. Eventually I even had like the onboarding test. They had like, an ECT test, whatever. I had them memorized. Like I would fly through them so fast.
Yeah.
Cause like, by the time you've done so many, you're like, I've done this like 6 times. Yeah. Like it's A, C, D, E, whatever. Like I just know what it was. Yeah.
So I think like something that I've seen that's really interesting, because as we started this podcast, I think we kind of had some mixed ideas about like who we were talking to. And I think part of it, I thought we were talking to like people our age, like, you know, I'm late 30s, Josh is early 30s. Actually, I don't even know how old you are. Are you somewhere in between?
No, 42.
Oh, 42. All
Yeah.
right. So I thought you were like, yeah, younger, but
Mm.
so that's good. Even with all that work you've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, like as we got into it, you know, coming up here to where we're working now, and I don't know if it's just like the nature of the hospital we work in up here, it's just kind of a chill thing, but I was realizing like people our age and definitely people older than us didn't really, and it's not laziness, I think it's just like a level of comfort. Like they're not really into trying anything new. They're very comfortable where they're at. They'd rather pick up the extra shift than try something like, you know, I don't know if it's just risk averse, but I guess what I'm getting at is just like, what do you think it is that kind of prevents people from trying things outside of healthcare? Is it just the uncertainty, or just they're just fixed on this, like, I work an extra shift, it's this much money?
And we know it's not because they just love their job, because we go into
Right.
work and we hear complaining 24/7.
Yeah, I think people like structure. I think just kind of human nature. People like structure. They don't like the unknown. It's scary. And I think until there's some people are more risk averse than others. Like I'm obviously like I like to think myself, I take calculated risk. Like I'm not going to just blindly jump off a cliff, but um it's just kind of, I think it depends on like also like how much you've waded into those waters. Like the more you do it, if you've never dipped your toe in, and you're not going to want to do anything, but if you dip your toe in and you're okay, then they're probably going to go a little deeper and a little deeper. I think, but it's just getting people to take that first step is
Yeah.
the tough part, and it's outside their comfort zone. Yeah.
Well, and you and I, you know, have both talked probably to the same people about stuff that we're doing, and they hear about what we're doing. It's like, oh wow, how are you doing that? And then you go into it, it's like, you should try this, and it's like, no, I'm probably not going to do that. And I'm just like, but why? So I don't know.
Yeah, a classic one that I would come up with was when I was flying back and forth. I'm living in Washington at the time. Actually, it was Washington, and splitting my time between Washington, Texas, and then California. People are like, that sounds like so much work. Like you're flying back and forth. There's plane tickets. There's all this stuff. And I was like, well, if you do the math, you're still considerably ahead. And there's like, well, I would just miss my family too much, or that's too much time away. And, I would always come back and I was like, okay, well, if you work at 9 to 5 and you're working 40 hours a week, then you have what, Saturday and Sunday with your family. And Saturday, you're exhausted from the week, but you're going to probably go make the most of it. And then Sunday, you got to go to work the next week. You have like maybe 8 days with your family. I was like, you can go out here, work for 10, have 20 days that are unencumbered. Like that's way more time with your family, but they just, nobody would see it that way. Like you just have to like kind of change the way you're thinking and the way you're doing it. Like you can have like quality time. Like you can be there every night after your kid gets home from school, 3 weeks out of the month. Like that's a pretty big deal versus you get to see them on the weekends. Like it's kind of a different mindset.
So I kind of went through that same calculation, and I did that, and then I'm like, oh, 20 more days I can work. And so
that's the danger.
So
that
forget family time. No,
Yeah.
I would definitely fall into that trap if I went that route. So you have to be very calculated, and you have to be able to say no, which is sometimes pretty hard to do.
In all fairness, that is exactly what I do. That's why I wind up with like 4 jobs and I work almost every day of the week. Because I set myself up to where I don't have to. And then I'm like, oh, I could just pick up some dialysis days. Oh, I could pick up, some of these days and that days and extra hospital days. And the next thing I know, I'm looking at my calendar and I'm like, what did I
do? So all these like extra shifts that because it sounds like for a lot of, you've been doing this 16 years. It sounds like a good amount of those years you've been working on quite a bit. Do you think any of that has to do with just kind of the way you grew up and not having anything, and now you have this like pretty clear path to making a decent amount of money? Or is it because you're working and trying to work towards something that will eventually, maybe get you out of this cycle?
Well, I think initially it was like just the poor kid freaking out and not trying to be poor. That was the initial response, was like, oh my God, I can't go back to that. Like I'm going to like, and then eventually too, I have a house that I bought for my mom. I have a house I bought for my sister. I have, I have all these people that are like kind of relying on me. So I'm like, I can't stop. And then it also becomes hard to like turn it off. But then eventually, after working in healthcare for a while, you realize how broken and how corrupt and how crazy the system is. And and I don't know how sustainable this model is. And, you're already seeing, like you guys had on one of your other podcasts, the concierge medicine. And I'm already seeing that out here, and I've done a bunch of traveling out of the country, doing medical trips out of the country. And, there's a 2-tier system in a lot of countries. There's everyone, the system that everyone has access to, the public option, if you will. And then there's a private, which in a lot of places actually can be really good. You can get excellent healthcare in Guatemala if you have money, but you definitely don't want to go to the public option. And I see our system is actually starting to be more and more like that every day. I personally have used concierge. I'm a Kaiser member. I have Kaiser insurance. I still have a concierge physician that I use for certain things. So I think it's bifurcating that way. And I don't see how sustainable this is. And maybe I hope I'm wrong, and hopefully it lasts a lot longer. But for me, I'm also looking at like, okay, I don't want to have all my eggs in this basket either. Like, and at this point, the nursing income is so good that I'm like, okay, what can I do to replace this income? Is going to be like 2 or 3 jobs, and I'm going to be right back to working every single day of the week. Even if I'm working concrete or something, like I'm still I'm going to take a hit. The hourly wage that I command now is so high that, starting from scratch again for a different career path would be really difficult.
Yeah. When you're saying like you don't see this being sustainable, you don't see like the overall healthcare system being sustainable long term for people, or just in terms of like the availability of all these different types of jobs, like for you as a nurse?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is like I see systems like HCA, right? They're notorious for being terrible, and they run them. They're running healthcare like a business, and it's a business with like really, really close to the red line, where they come in and they just gut everything, and they make it pretty miserable for all their employees. They come in and they just fire much staff as they can, and they just take that extra work and put it on the other employees. And I don't know. I'm hoping that like the West Coast nursing has been really good and mostly avoided that, but I don't know how long they can thin that model off, because now these companies are going to have to compete with them. And so eventually I'm worried that model is going to like take over, and all of the jobs are going to be terrible. Part of the reason that we're blessed with the places I work right now, where you work, they're good to work at. Like, it's not bad. Like, I don't mind it, but I've also been on those travel contracts in other places, and it's terrible. Like, and you're like, I can't wait. You're counting down the end of this contract from day one, and thank God you're getting paid what you get paid. But in those systems, you're not even going to be making that much money, so you can't even take that home. And so like that kind of scares me and puts me a little bit on edge. And I think I want backup plans. I want other things to do. And then also I think I want a little bit more autonomy over like how I make my money and how I spend my time and what I do with it. If I want to take 2 months off and go hang out in, Puerto Rico or something, like you can do that and, work it remotely, or you can set things up with, if you're like if you have a set schedule for a big company, it's a lot harder to do that. Like getting vacation time is a nightmare at Kaiser. Like you have to plan it a year ahead of time. Half the time they deny it. Like it's very difficult to get vacation time. And so, like just having more control over how my money's spent, how I make my money, how much work I want to put into it, how hard I want to go is like a huge factor. And then having I think we've probably got at least another good 10 years of this healthcare system before it completely
That's all I need.
Yeah.
That's all I need.
Yeah. And I want to be out by then too, but like, it's a big uncertain, who knows, and so like, and that puts, maybe that's that getting that scared poor kid in me, but like, they just want to be like, I don't like that uncertainty, and I want to like have some contingency plans,
I definitely think that was big for us after what we saw with COVID. Cause I mean, there was like the initial phase of COVID where hospitals shut down, and that it only lasted a couple of weeks. But then after that, there's this huge spike in all these travel contracts. But I remember leaving, I was in a contract until the end of 2020. And when I left in 2021, they'd done this huge like hiring. They hired all these nurses at the end of 2020. And then for whatever reason, I think the numbers went down to the beginning of 2021, and there were no contracts. There were no ER contracts anywhere. And I think I was out of work for a month or so. And then, fast forward to when the vaccines come out, now they're requiring people to get vaccinated. And, I think I've talked about on here before, but I didn't get vaccinated. I was working in Wisconsin at the time, lost my job. Josh was faced with a similar decision. And it was just like, same thing. We don't want to be in that position where it's like either A, you have to do something you don't want to do to keep your job, or B, you lose your job because for whatever reason. But yeah, and then the whole healthcare system dynamic. I mean, that's a whole nother thing that I'm not even
Yeah,
fully aware of.
very very curious where it's going to be in 10 years. Like I'm kind of with you. I don't think it's going to be great, but at the same time, like now is a good time to capitalize on it while we can.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you because it's come up a few times recently where we'll talk about unions versus non-unions. And traditionally, I'm a pretty capitalist. I think if you work really hard or if you run a good business, you should be able to keep employees happy and keep them around, and
Mhm.
that's how a good business becomes great. But in healthcare, that doesn't seem to be the case. So I guess I don't know what it is. Like, is marketing for healthcare and for nursing, is it just so good that people will stay in their crappy jobs forever? Like, what do you think it is why people will stay?
I have probably a pretty interesting perspective on this because I've been on all of it. So I have done strike nursing. So full disclosure, I've done quite a bit of strike nursing, made a lot of money. I've also been at the table for the on the union negotiating, and my name's in the back of a contract because I signed it, because I was a negotiating team for a hospital. So I've been on both sides of it. Um, as you could tell, I'm not particularly like if someone's going to pay me to do a job, I'm just going to do the job, right? Like, like whatever. So, and my very first travel contract, I went from a union hospital in the West Coast where most of them are union and went to St. Louis, Missouri at SLU. And they were in the process of contemplating the hospital itself, and all the employees were thinking about going union. They eventually did. And there was massive discrepancies there. Like, they would get like nickel raises for a yearly raise sometimes, and maybe 10 cents, something like that. And so somebody could be there for like 10 years and only have a couple dollars of raises. And then someone like me, I came in on a travel contract and they wanted to hold on to me. And because I came from trauma background and, I checked all the right boxes, and they were going to start me at a significantly higher pay because I was like, yeah, I'm not only going to come here if you guys give me a decent amount. That was way over those nurses who have been there for years and years and years and years and years and been getting these like nickel raises. And that disparity is pretty bad. Like, and that happens in a lot of industries, but nursing seems like it can be really bad. And then, but on the flip side, they didn't have any of the protections I had in my union job, and they were, they'd fire people for silly reasons and do all this other stuff. And I saw like these flagrant abuses, and I was like, man, you guys really probably should unionize. But I've also been in shops where the union is like, like Kaiser is notorious for holding on to terrible nurses because like they've just been there since the dawn of time, right? And so, racking out their pension, and that is kind of a tough spot. But you can get rid of those nurses. It's just work. There's a process and there's a whole thing you got to go through. And I think in the union shop, you at least get the benefit of having them make them jump through the hoops to get rid of you if they decide to. And then like eliciting big changes are hard for them to do. I was in a union hospital once where the new CEO they brought in, she or head nurse administrator, she had this brilliant idea because we had all these sick calls, and she just wanted to make 4 units of the hospital. It was anything that was tele, so tele, ICU, ER, anything that had any monitoring was 1 unit. Anything to do with kids was a unit. So NICU, PICU, like all of that. Anything related to surgery. So anything from cardiac to GI lab to anything, and then regular med surge, right? Those are the 4 baskets. And anybody who's been a nurse in any capacity is realize that that's a terrible idea. The difference between a NICU and mother baby is very different. The difference between, like open heart and like a GI procedure. And if it wasn't for the union, that would have been implemented. Like this lady was dead set on it, and there's so sometimes I see the union protecting and like making it so that changes don't happen. But then in other aspects, it kind of prevents the hospital from adapting to market changes. And so you wind up with this really weird, like, I can't really tell you which one's better. Personally, union hospitals have always been better for me, and I've enjoyed better, safer staffing, better ratios. But I don't know that they're always keeping the best and brightest nurses there. But it is overall probably a safer and better experience. But I have mixed. Like I'm with you. Like I'm kind of I'm a little bit of a free market guy, but I'm the illusion of the free market is now gone for me. There's no such thing in this with lobbying and people buying your political officials. What is the free market? Like we
Yeah.
have, I believe we have an illusion of a capitalist system that's not really a capitalist system. It hasn't been for a long time. And so in that sense, like doesn't really matter if it's union or Catholic. You know, it doesn't really matter. You know, the
Whatever
people.
puts more money in my pocket.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I guess in my mind, if certain hospitals they make terrible decisions like grouping all these floors together, or any other decision that might look good on paper but is really just a terrible decision, in my mind, everybody's going to leave that really crappy place and the hospital will go to crap. But I don't really see that happening very often. So what's the disconnect there?
I think it's that fear of change. Like people will put up with,
Oh yeah.
they'll put up with just so much garbage. They'll just put up with it and put up with it and put up with it. And then especially if it implements slowly, it's like a slow burn. People will just stay put. And it's instead of like, it's a lot of work and you got to really put yourself out there to look at these other places and, you know, start over fresh and do all this other things. And so I think it's, that's a piece of it. And then, you know, if you have your roots down and like there's one major hospital system in your town and you got to commute pretty far to the next one and your kid goes to school there and your husband works there and this happens and that happens, like it's hard to pick up and move. And so I think sometimes people just lack of options, or maybe they haven't, you know, they were in a really niche area and they haven't been out of, like maybe they were a mother and baby and they haven't done anything else in 20 years. Like what else, you don't want to go learn a new place, you know, and like a completely new type of system. So that might be a piece of it. I mean, I don't have a great idea because I'm one to just pick up and go. You know, I'm like, okay, if I don't like this place, I'm leaving.
I think that's me also. I just don't understand that other mentality, because if something's not good or if something's better, I'm going most of the time. At least I have the last 10 years.
Yeah. But I mean, also in your position too, though, like you have a more niche skill set that is like in high demand. And so like, you know, that you like, there's like, if you're a generic nurse, there's a lot of generic nurses, you know, and there was a shortage for a while, but if you're just say you're just, and nothing against a floor nurse, but if you're a med surg nurse, like how many med surg nurses are there out there? You know, like, so you're up against every other med surg nurse. And so maybe that's a piece of it if you had to guess. Yeah.
True.
I think it's a personality thing too, because as I was traveling, it always seemed like there were a lot of ER positions, and so the ER didn't pay as high. There were a lot of med surg positions; those didn't pay as high. But like ICU, I don't know if it's like a personality thing, like if they just like controlled environments or whatever. But ICU travel contracts were always really high, and it is a more specialized area. And then like OR, all those things. So I don't know. Maybe it's just because it's a smaller pool, so you get higher rates, but I always wondered how much of like just the personality of each of the different areas played into that.
Well, and then you get the opposite end of that where like when I did flight, because flight is, for lack of a better word, cool and everybody wants to do it, they pay you nothing. Like you get paid nothing. You have so much, like I could put in chest tubes, I can crack, I can intubate, I could do all this crazy stuff in the air. Like, and it was, God, I think I was really far in my career. So I was like at least a 10-year veteran nurse and I was making like under 30 an hour. And
yeah, but you're wearing your Top Gun suit head to toe.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're 20 and they were 24-hour shifts. And so, but they didn't pay you overtime. Somehow there was this weird exemption.
So you signed that.
Yeah. And so I remember one day, like right before I left, I had a 32-hour shift because I got dinged out at the end. And then you had to come back into charting. And every time you touch a patient, you have about 2 hours of charting to do, which is wild because of the insurance and the billing and everything. And then I wound up having a 32-hour shift, went home, slept for 6. And then I wound up with I think I had a 36-hour shift, slept for like 6 hours and came back and did a 32-hour shift. And, you know, and I was running the whole time. I was in like a million different cities and going and doing all this crazy stuff and doing crazy, you know, med calculations in my head with no sleep and trying to figure all this out. And I'm thinking, I'm making like $28 an hour or something to do all this. Like, this is wild. Are you flying?
Not that cool.
But I'm so cool.
Yeah, it's not that cool. Like, this is terrible. Like, I'm exhausted, probably going to make a mistake eventually, you know, like there's no way, you know. And so like, it's just one of those things, but they just knew people wanted to do it so bad. And so it's like travel contracts in Hawaii.
Yeah, I was going to say, they pay crap because it's like, you know, you want to be here.
Yeah.
We don't have to pay you to come out here.
Yeah.
You know, one of the interesting things, one of the travelers that came through this hospital up here, she was a flight nurse too. And something I never considered. I mean, I'm only 6 feet tall, but she was only probably like 5'6" or something. And she was telling me, like, even for her with the helmet on, she would be sitting like this. And I was like, oh man, I didn't even think about how tight the space is in there for however long the flight is.
Yeah, much bigger than me. It's not like I did fixed wing and rotor wing. So the fixed wing wasn't bad. We had a Pilatus, but that was nice. I liked the Pilatus, and theoretically we could get 2 patients in there, but we only did 1. On the rotor wing on the helicopter, on the type of helicopter we had, you actually couldn't even get to the patients pretty much nearly waist down. And then you're sitting, you're sitting facing your medic or your other, we would either run with a medic, an RT, or another nurse. And you're sitting basically knee to knee. And now this patient's stable. And then if you think the patient's unstable or intubated, you put somebody in the co-pilot seat and they flip the seat around so they're at the head just in case you lost an airway or something. But, if patient was stable and became unstable in the air, I'm sitting beside him like on a bus bench basically. And then you have to like intubate like sideways. Like you're just basically trying to like you're sitting right beside this person, like you're basically sitting shoulder to shoulder with the person, and now you're trying to you have to intubate them. And it is not a great scenario. And we have a C-Max, so it makes it easier, but it's still not easy. And then scenarios like you had to practice scenarios of say you do a scene call and you land on the highway and the car is upside down and you can't extract them, you have to intubate on your stomach. That's a weird thing, so we had to practice doing that because that happened to one of our colleagues. It's oh, by the way, we should probably practice intubating from our stomach. And I was oh yeah, probably, and so things like that. Again, $20 something an hour. I just want to point that out. It is
I'll
insane.
pass.
Yeah, it was insane, man. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Well, we're getting kind of on here, but I want to talk about the credit card flipping a little bit. We were chatting about that earlier. Sorry. Credit card churning.
So how about this?
You can call it churning, flipping, or just even maximization would be a good way.
Yeah, give us a very basic entry level, because I think some of the stuff you're doing is much more advanced. Yeah. But let's say
1. What you're doing is level 10. Give us level 1.
Step 1.
I think on the most basic level, if every single dollar you spend that can be spent through a credit card should be spent through a credit card. If you are not doing that, you are leaving money on the table. There are tons of cards out there that are 0 yearly fees that give you a percent back, even if it's 1%, 1.5%, 2%. There's lots of bonus categories and things like that. But I run every penny of my spending through a card. The trick is you have to be very diligent and you have to be really good about making sure that you pay that off, because they're going to come at you, particularly if you're new to the game, they're going to come at you with really 24% interest, something like that. As long as you never get capped on that, you'll never pay them a penny. And so I'd go in weekly. Monday's my day. I go in every Monday and I check every single card and make sure there's no random fee, there's no anything. And I have a lot of cards. And so I go through and I just check through, sign into Amex, check everything, sign into Chase, everything. I just do it Monday. I spend 20 minutes. And then if there's any, bills, if I have any spend on there, I just wipe it out. So I always wipe it out. I never keep a balance on any of my cards. And that is just, at the end of the day, that's just free money. It's not ever going to make you super rich. It's never going to be a ton of money unless you're running, if you have a big business where you're churning through, my brother has an automotive business and they buy 400,000 worth of parts every year. That's actually going to make you a good amount. And they weren't running it through points. They were running it through a debit card. And so I had him switch over because I was you guys are just losing money. Basically, why wouldn't you want the free money? But the big thing is most of these cards have sign-up bonuses. And that's where I really start making money. If you don't want to even get into the personal one, you can get into the business side. Or, if you don't want to get in the business side, you can go on the personal side. And you start with a company like Chase, because Chase has a 524 rule. It means you can only have 5 credit cards with any company, not just Chase, but any company in 24 months. And if you try to go for 6, they won't approve you. So you always start with Chase, and you get every single card that you can get from them that you get approved for with a sign-on bonus, and you just meet that minimum spend. And the trick is just doing the math. You wait. There's a good website called Doctor for Credit. That's what most people use. And you just do a lot of the travel websites. There's a lot of miles to burn and various different travel websites. They kind of track when good deals come up. And so a new credit card offer will come up and Chase wants to get everybody on the Sapphire Reserve. They'll say, hey, we'll give you 100,000 points if you spend $5,000 or something. And you got to do it in 3 months. And so what you do is you sign up for that card knowing that you probably, you can figure out, okay, I spend this much on groceries. I spend this much on my insurance. I spend this much on this. And you just run it all through that card, at least temporarily. and you'd get that 100,000 points, and you could use that as a statement credit of $1,000, and so that gives you $1,000, boom, right back. And it didn't really cost you anything. And then it's not even counting like the other credit card perks, and like you can go super deep into it, but the basic level is you're just basically trying to grab bonuses and get spending. And then once you run out of your personal stuff that you can do, you go Chase, then you go Amex, you do Capital One, you do your Citi card. Once you go through all of those, then you get into the business world and you start churning the business ones, because you hit all your limit with the personal level. And so you can start getting pretty considerable returns if you stack enough of them up. And again, it's really more about you're kind of playing it's a game of numbers and just spreadsheets and keeping track of like, okay, what does this card cost me? What do I get out of it? And then you got to factor in like, okay, if I'm getting 2% back and I got to spend, $100, and you're getting $2 back per 100. So like you got to add that into your equation. And then as you just kind of look at it, but the simple way is just, you get a really good card like a Chase Sapphire Reserve, or Amex Platinum might be a little too expensive for most people, but maybe a Amex Gold, you get like 4x back on dining, and you just set it up like that. So like I have a certain credit card I use for dining, it gives me 4% back. I have a certain credit card I use for different kinds of spending. I have a credit card that gives me 6% back at grocery stores. I have a card that gives me 3% back at gas stations. I have a card that gives me 4% back on dining. One that gives me bonuses on different things, and then that that adds up. It's just a couple percent, but if you're running enough money through, it can be a lot.
Yeah.
And then there's also like little bonuses, like around Christmas time, like Chase was giving me, for some reason on Backcountry, I do a lot of outdoor stuff. So Backcountry, if you spent $400, they gave you $200 in credit. And then I stacked that with like a web browser like Rakuten, which gave me 15% back. So I got 15% back off the 400 plus $200 off. So basically you spend 100 and something bucks and you get $400 worth of merchandise. And then the people that are really in the training world, they didn't turn around and sell that on eBay. And then they walk away with the money. So if you do that at scale,
yeah.
So you scale that up. It doesn't sound like much, but if you scale it and you do the arbitrage, it's just like arbitrage. There's buying groups and there's reselling groups, and you can go deep down that rabbit hole. If people really want to look into it, they could look at, they could Google buying groups and figure that out pretty easily. They could look at, gift card churning. That's one of the things they'll do. People buy gift cards with it, and there's certain ways to trigger the gift cards to be bonus categories. So yeah, so you can buy gift cards. Yeah.
So many thoughts in my head right now. So that I'm already overwhelmed.
Sorry, that's the second version, but
that's like level 5, I feel like.
Yeah, I think you crept up there.
But I guess one of my questions is, a lot of places will charge you an additional 3% if you use a card, as opposed to if you use a different card. So I assume you would not, like, you only use, I guess, you still use it on places that will charge you additional 3%, because I feel like that kind of negates the cash back, like 2 or 3%.
Yeah, so that's the so like for instance, like I use my card, like if I have a big spend that I need to hit, I use it to pay taxes. I know I'm going to hit that 3%, but my bonus is so big that I'm just it's just a wash, right? So they're going to charge me 3%. I just do the math. I'm like, okay, it's going to cost me, $600 to run this card. That sucks. I don't love it. But if I'm making $2,500 on the bonus, then I'm like, okay, well, I just walked away with $1,900, right? So that, to me, that's part of the math. But then you also got to say it's not actually 3%, because the credit card, when you run it, most of them baseline give you 1% back on anything. A lot of them will do 1.5%. So you're really actually 1.5%, because they're going to give it back to you in points again anyways. And so it's just kind of just crunching the numbers and figuring out where it lies, and like how much perks you can get. Like I travel a lot and I fly a lot. So like for me, like, the Centurion Lounge access is worth its weight in gold, and so like, I love that,
I got a taste of that. It was incredible.
Yeah. And I can bring guests now. So once you spend 75,000, you can put guests and stuff through. So you just got to like get your, your card up to there.
Just 75,000.
Yeah. Which sounds unobtainable, but there's like ways around it. Or like what I do is say you did have a platinum card and you wanted to add someone to it, you can just you make them an employee and give them their own platinum card. and they can have lounge access too. And it's a small fee, but
I will be your employee, Josh.
yeah. And
Sounds
so,
good. It's only $300.
yeah. And so then you get a $300 and now you have a Centurion access lounge. So it depends on how much you fly, but it's a good like hack around that too. So there's like, there's a lot of little perks that if you just do the homework, then there's so much benefit to be had in some of the stuff like this. And then just like, this is just like one of like the money saving strategies, you know? So like when I want to take vacation stuff, like I don't pay for flights. I haven't paid for an international flight in a long time.
Well, and that was a big thing because I know one of the big things that nurses are really into is travel, especially with the schedule we have. It allows for you to take a lot of trips. Every nurse I know has been into travel. And, you know, you were telling me earlier how you went to this place that's $2,500 a night for 2 nights for 80,000 points. And that's another cool thing with credit cards is when you book through the credit cards using the points, you get like these huge discounts on your stay. So you essentially stayed somewhere for 80,000 points, which translates to about $800 that should have cost you $5,000 for those 2 nights. So, I mean, that alone is incredible. And you're already traveling anyway, so you might as well be maximizing the benefits from these cards.
Yeah. And I'm typically sitting on like, you know, a couple million points. And so 80,000 at that point is just it's negligible, right?
Yeah,
so
a couple million points. That's just like,
yeah,
that's just like $900,000 that I have to spend.
yeah. But there's, you know, there's ways to do that. Yeah. And so like, yeah. It depends on what you're doing and what kind of business you're running. Like I know people, there's a guy who his company, he worked for a company, he had to buy, I forget exactly what it was, but I was just reading this the other day. He was on one of the blogs, but he had to buy, I think it was catering, like big amounts of catering for a company that he worked for. And they catered all the time. And they didn't care if he ran his card. So he would run his card and then they would basically petty cash him back. And these were big catering events. So it's like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 things. He's doing this like multiple times a week. So this guy's running through like $40,000 a month. It's not even his money to spend. Right. And so like, he doesn't even have to spend the money. He has to run it through his card and just carry it for a little bit. And as long as he's willing to do that little bit of carry, he gets all of the benefit. Sure. And, you know, it doesn't cost him anything. So he's just basically making out like a bandit. And, you know, and the company could be utilizing that. They just don't know. Yeah. Right. They're just not doing it and this is so common. Like I see so many people, when we go out, they pay with a debit card. I'm like, why are you using a debit card? Like,
I'm so glad I paid with a credit card. I would have been shamed. I almost pulled out a debit card. I was like, oh,
yeah. You know, there's a time and place for them, but like, you know, like it's just, to me, I'm just trying to like, you know, maximize every penny. I'm not like one of those fires that's like living a miser life and being miserable. Like I take trips, I do everything, whatever. But you know, to me, it's free money. It's just money that's just on the table. So it's like, why not utilize it?
Yeah. Well, I feel like we could have probably several different podcast episodes with you, and maybe we'll just have to have you come back because you got like 16 different businesses that we didn't even talk about tonight. Buying gold, other random ideas, cars, and all kinds of stuff. But let's do it. It's first time, so this is the first episode of what I would assume will be another one. So, but we'll do we'll run through the final 5 real quick. Josh, do you know him?
I don't. Hey, give me just 2 seconds.
What was a place you could educate yourself?
All right. So where do you go if you are looking to get some education? Where do you go?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, generally podcast is my go-to, but nothing specific. Like I'm kind of a weird one in that category because like I feel like a lot of the more established podcasts sometimes they have kind of an agenda, you know, like, and so they're trying to push you to their products or their stuff or their way of doing it. So a lot of times, honestly, good old like legwork of like good old Wikipedia and just like, or just even like government websites, stuff like that. And I'll just start reading and just start digging through. Usually I'll use like a podcast to kind of point me in the right direction. And then I'll just start digging through article after article or websites and just kind of like start building a case for something. Like when I was trying to learn how to do credit card hacks, like there's so much obscure information out there. It's really hard to get a straight answer. But if the best place I found, to be quite honest, is probably Reddit. Like it's like I use Reddit for, if I want a real answer to something, it's almost always you'll eventually get to it in Reddit, like which is kind of weird, but it took me a while to figure that out, but Reddit is the most honest version of everything that you would generally find if you can wade through a lot of the garbage.
All right. I know Reddit. It seems like such a. I feel like it's come a long way from its beginnings.
It's kind of like Wikipedia now. Like
Yeah.
Wikipedia, honestly, is really good. Like it's more
Yeah.
accurate than most things. You know, it just you have to know what it is, and
Yeah.
there's a potential for stuff not be correct there. But yeah,
Yeah, for sure. So number 2 is what advice would you give yourself as a new grad?
Ooh, advice as a new grad. Um, that's a. I would probably, as a new grad, I would say learn your contract. If you're in a union shop, and even if you're not in a union shop, like work smarter, not harder. So figure out, how do you pop yourself in a time and a half? How do you pop yourself in a double time? Where are those money making opportunities? Where are, incentive shifts and bonus pay, and like really familiarize yourself with that, because you can really maximize your income with the same amount of work. And so like if you just do like the legwork ahead of time and learn, or at least find a veteran nurse who's willing to share with you or something like that. That's probably, if you're trying to just like, from a financial standpoint, there's lots of stuff to tell nurses, but from a financial standpoint, it just maximize your earning potential while you're actually there.
Yeah.
All right. What do you wait? How do I phrase that usually?
12 months.
Yeah.
So-
what excites you about the next 12 months?
Ooh, for me personally, I'm really gonna start doubling down on multi-unit housing. So, I've got a bunch of pieces in place. Like I just got a really cool HELOC situation that I'm working on. I'm gonna try to secure another one that gives me a lot of capital. And like I'm really looking at a lot of really cool areas that are up and coming that I might be able to get into with some multifamily units. And so that's what I'm really excited about. That's what I really want to get into. So I'd like to pull the trigger and have a bunch more units by 12 months from now. Yeah.
HELOC is pretty much what got us on our start.
Yeah. Travel nursing,
Kind of nice.
and then the HELOC.
True. Yeah. Travel
Yeah,
nursing,
that was
HELOC.
pretty much, that was the formula. Number 4 is, how do you define success?
Having the financial resources and I think the type of job where I can kind of define how I want to spend my day or my time. Like, I'd like to get to the point when I get to decide, do I want to work more or not? Do I want to work harder or not? When do I want to work? Like, if I'm in control of like those aspects, then that to me is successful. Like that, as far as like business wise, like financially, like I don't have a set number I need to hit or anything like that. That doesn't matter to me. It's just, I want to have enough to live comfortably and decide when and where I work.
Yeah.
Like if one day you get fired, you're just like, all right.
Exactly. You're like, I've had it with this place. I'm done. I'm walking
good.
out the door. I'm out. Yeah.
That's the best position to be in. That is true freedom.
Yeah.
All right. The last one is, what's the biggest financial mistake you've made and what'd you learn from it?
Ooh, that was my second house. I bought a house, my second house I ever bought, which was hard to buy in the first place because I was traveling at the time. And me and my ex-girlfriend at the time thought we were going to be in that spot for quite a while. And it turns out we weren't. And we started working at a hospital that we thought we really liked, and then weren't so fond of it anymore. And so bought the house and then paid a lot of money for it. And then a year later decided we should move. And one, it was under 2 years, so that kind of hurt. And then two, had I held on to that house, the appreciation on it was so much, like so much. I lost so much equity. Like I was just doing so much at the time that I thought about having a property manager come in and rent it, and it would have been pretty much break even. But I was just too split that I didn't want to deal with it. So I wound up selling it and walking away basically even after 1 year. But it was a terrible financial mistake. I probably left, it's of today's value, I probably left $350,000, $400,000 on the table. Like if I would just kept it. Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah.
What'd you pay for it, and what would it be worth today, you think?
I paid $300,000, and I paid just under, it's like 290 something. And I was remember thinking at the time, like, this is so expensive. Like, this is the most expensive house I've ever bought. And it was a really nice place just above WSU campus there in Vancouver, Washington. Great spot. And I think today's market, last I checked, I think it was worth at least $650, if not more. I think it peaked though at the peak of the prices, like that area kind of went back down, but I think it was peaked around like $7 at one point. So yeah, that hurts. That hurts a lot. Yeah, that was a big mistake that I definitely regret, and I would have loved to still have that place. And my mortgage payment on that one was $1,700 a month, and the rent in that area now is far beyond that. So like, I still would have actually been, not only would have had the equity, I would have been in the green and been cash positive every month on the rental value. But I was like, I just didn't want to be bothered with it at the time, and that was a huge mistake. Like, that was a massive mistake.
Yeah, you can never. I don't know. I mean, there's something for the peace of mind though at the time. Whenever you're going through that, I mean, obviously you could have made it work, but
well, what makes it worse is I got a letter from the IRS a couple of years later, said I owed him $180,000. And that was not a fun letter to get, by the way. If you ever got a letter from the IRS, they're not fun to get anyways, but one saying you owe them $180,000 is even worse. Fortunately, I guess it just takes that long to get through. It was like years later. It just took like 3 or 4 years to like make it back around to where somebody looked at it and they said, hey, this was a taxable event and you didn't claim it and whatever. And fortunately, I still had all the documentation, and I was able to show. I was like, well, actually, technically, I think on paper, I lost $10,000, but when I sold it, but I stayed there for a year for free. So it kind of, to me, I didn't really lose 10, but technically I lost $10,000. And it's because I lost $10,000. It wasn't a taxable event. I actually was in the hole. And they sent me back a letter like a couple months later. We're like, okay, you're good. And I didn't have to pay anything, but those 2 months, like until that happened, I was like, I was not okay, man. Like when I got that letter, I was like, I was out in Texas visiting a friend. I was like, yeah, I was like totally stoked. And like, I was like, drinks are on me, like whatever. But that is a scary letter. Like that is like a life ruining letter, And so that again, like segued into selling that house. Like I never should have sold it because that also led to that scary letter. Yeah.
Well, are you on any kind of social media?
No, I'm not
anywhere.
Not really.
He's
no,
a ghost.
Man, I just exist. Like I have them, but I don't use them.
I will be the gatekeeper. If you want to know anything about flipping credit cards or travel nursing or anything, you reach out to me.
Yeah. Ask Colin, and you can send me a message.
Can find him.
I can find him.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't exist. My real name's Dave.
Yeah. Well, hey man, this has been cool. This is a cool new format for us, and we'll probably have to do this again because there's a lot to go over. Definitely.
Here. A lot to unpack. All right, man. See you.
Yeah.
All right.
See you.